This video covers the fifth stage of classical argument, the refutation. A refutation attempts to refute the other side's argument. To refute means to prove an argument to be false or irrelevant or otherwise inadequate. So far, we've been working as if there were only one side to the argument, but of course there are at least two sides to every argument, and we're going to be examining our opponent's side of the argument by studying and writing a refutation. Why refute the other side's position anyway? Well, for one thing, it's best to inoculate your audience against the other side's arguments before the other side presents them to your audience. So if you are the first one to present the other side's position, you can pretty much defuse the power of their argument often if you have a good refutation. It all goes back to when we were children. Do you remember when something broke or you did something wrong or your sister did, and suddenly there was a race to get to mommy or daddy? Why? Because you knew and your sister knew that the first one to mommy or daddy would get to tell the tale first. And the person who got to tell the tale first would attempt to prejudice mommy or daddy against the other side's position. We know this. We still do this as adults. This happens in argumentation. This happens in courtrooms. The second thing that you can do with a refutation is to make you seem reasonable. You accept some part of your opponent's answer because we've learned in arguments that there's always something that you agree on. That's a prerequisite to having an argument in the first place. And you can look reasonable and fearless by accepting the full weight of their punch, and you'll look impervious as well as reasonable when you do that. The third and final reason, I guess, for refuting is the most important, and that's it lets you point out problems with the other side's argument. That's really important. A refutation has a particular structure. It's a flexible structure, but these 5 elements are in there somewhere. The first is to introduce one of the other side's arguments fairly, and we see this here in my argument to keep the drinking age at 21. I make a refutation against my opponent who claims that the drinking age should be reduced to 18. So the first thing I do is introduce one of the other side's arguments, and I try to do it fairly. Some supporters of returning the drinking age to 18 years argue that the 21-year age requirement is a kind of bandage, covering up but not treating the deep wound given by society's expectations. See, I'm not calling them names. I'm not using a lot of connotation, unfair connotation, to characterize my opponent. I'm not above using some connotation, but I don't want to appear unfair. The next sentence is in purple, and here I quote the source that goes against my position. And of course, I make sure to integrate it into my own syntax. And here it is. Malcolm Gladwell, for instance, points out that through its advertising and college parties, American culture reinforces alcohol as a drug to facilitate loose and reckless behavior. So there it is. It backs up their position that I had in the first sentence, the blue sentence, where my position covers up like a Band-Aid but really doesn't treat the deep wound. And I'm apparently, according to Malcolm Gladwell and those that would use him against my position, I'm just putting a Band-Aid on this deep American wound. While it's on my mind, the underlining is for some templates that you can get off of our template document that's attached to this assignment. Now, the third thing I'm going to do is to summarize the quote. And again, I want to be fair. In other words, Gladwell believes that the 21-year age requirement says one thing, while advertising and university life say another. And now I'm going to really be fair here. I'm going to grant what I can. I want to come across as fair. I also want to narrow the issues. This is another reason why I grant what I can. I don't want to belabor points that we really agree on. So I'm going to go ahead and put what we agree on out front. And finally, number 5, the green language. This is the most vital part of it. This is the reason you're doing this. This is the refuting of the refutation. And to do this, I'm going to show that the argument is one of 5 things. It's either unwise, untrue, irrelevant, fallacious, or based on a faulty assumption. Let's see which one I do here. But Gladwell's argument ignores the fact that lowering the drinking age won't solve anything. Instead, American advertising and its college's fraternity life will still glorify drinking no matter what the drinking age is. So we should continue to protect our teenagers from alcohol abuse while also setting out to change America's drinking culture. So I'm basically saying that this position is unwise, that lowering the drinking age is just going to continue a problem and won't solve the issue that they address, which is this hypocritical approach that America has with respect to underage drinking. The template sheet has templates for all 5 of these steps of a refutation. The first 4 are here. Templates for introducing the other side's arguments, for integrating a quote, for following that quote and summarizing it, and then for granting what you can. Beyond those 4 parts of the refutation, of course, is the most important one, which is to refute. And there are 5 categories for that 5th step, that step to refute. And the first of the 5 is that it's not wise. We just saw this with the way I handled the argument against my keeping the drinking age at 21. The second one is it's not true. Prove it. So much of argumentation goes back to the playground, and this, of course, is one of the most early lines we learn from our classmates and friends. Prove it. And we're still at that level when we argue in college. The next one is it's irrelevant. And this is the other move we learned from the playground. So what? When someone says, so what? Even if they're like 6 years old, they're making a very sophisticated argument. They're saying, let's assume for the purposes of argument that what you say is true. It really doesn't have any bearing on my argument at all. So if I were to say the moon is made of green cheese and you say no, and you advance as a reason why it's not made of green cheese, is that the weather outside is rainy. I could say, so what? I'll admit, for the purpose of arguing, that the weather outside is rainy. What does that have to do with whether or not the moon is made of green cheese? You see, and I have refuted your rainy day argument. So relevance, even though it's childish, is a very important consideration. The fourth one is fallacy. You've probably learned some fallacious arguments. I've listed some of the best ones on a document that is attached to this assignment called Logical Fallacies, Definitions and Examples. The last argument you can make in your refutation, or at least argument category, is that the opponent's argument relies on a faulty assumption. So what's this business about a faulty assumption? Well, let's say your future college roommate comes to you this coming year and says, it's your turn to empty the trash. Well, first of all, is that an argument? Everything's an argument. Do you see this backwards? So let's map this argument. It's your turn to empty the trash. Can you find a claim of policy? Because that's going to be the chief claim here. That's going to be sort of the resolution that your roommate is advancing here. Right, it's empty the trash. That's a claim of policy, telling you what you should do. Any claim of fact in support of the claim of policy? Sure there is. It's your turn. In other words, I did it last time, says your roommate. That's a claim of fact supporting the claim of policy. Now it gets interesting. What is the underlying assumption, or what could be an underlying assumption? Now this is a hypothetical. Let your imagination go wild. You're with your roommate. You can put yourself in a good light here. What might the underlying assumption be? Emptying the trash is the only chore we do. That seems to be your roommate's underlying assumption. It's called a warrant, by the way, this underlying assumption. And warrants are usually unstated. They are usually just assumed. They're called assumptions. Implicit. Now that we've exposed the warrant, how might we attack it? Let your imagination go wild, as I say. Perhaps something like this. I cleaned the bathroom last time, and the time before that. In fact, I've cleaned the bathroom every single time it's been cleaned this year. So I think it's only right that you could at least take out the trash every time that needs to be taken out this year. Now, how does something like that look in a paper? Now, we probably wouldn't write a paper like that, but if we were to write a paper like that, how would it look? Well, we could use a template that's in our template document, and if we did, it would look like this. The words of the template are in black, and the blanks have been filled in with the green words. Rumi takes the position that I should empty the trash, and he supports his position by pointing out that he took it out last time. So there's his claim of policy and the claim of fact that supports it right from the map. But Rumi's reasoning is contradicted by its underlying assumption. That's his warrant. Rumi assumes that I don't do anything around here. The fact is, though, that I cleaned the bathroom last time. In fact, I always clean the bathroom. But now he's attacking that warrant with the fact is, though, I cleaned the bathroom last time. In fact, I always clean the bathroom. And now he wants to present some evidence of that claim of fact. And as proof, he advances another claim of fact, and that is that the roommate has admitted that he can't recall ever cleaning the bathroom. So there you go. This language, as I say, is in the template. Now let's try another one, and this time I'm going to ask you to pause the video at a certain time to fill in the blanks, in your mind at least. Let's map another argument. It's your birthday. I'll treat you to some frozen custard at Rita's tonight. Is that an argument? Yes! Everything's an argument. There's an argument there. Think about it. What is the claim of policy? And what is the claim of fact supporting that claim of policy? And then further, what's the warrant? What's the underlying assumption? What is that person assuming? Okay, pause the video and think. And write down a note or two. And then when you're ready, start it again. Okay, you're back. Now the claim of policy would be, let me treat you to Rita's tonight. It's a claim of policy, it's action. You should let me treat you to Rita's tonight would be the full expression of that claim of policy. How about the claim of fact supporting the claim of policy? Of course, it's your birthday. Now, what is the underlying assumption? Well, it could have been a lot of things, so there's no one right answer. It could be something like, when it's your birthday, you deserve to get some ice cream. Or traditionally, people give their friends gifts on their birthday. Any assumption like that. Here's some other assumptions. Here are three possibilities. You may have come up with some of them. Your friend assumes that you have no other plans. Your friend assumes that you like frozen custard. This person isn't your friend. Perhaps the person assumes that you've met before. So depending on which one of those is the case, you have an argument, right, to attack it. So I'm just going to choose one of those. I'm going to choose the I have no other plans. My parents are taking me out to Clyde's tonight. So let's practice taking this map and turning it into a paragraph using our template. So we'll put the template up here that we used with the taking out the trash argument. And pause the video and write in what you'd put in each blank if you'd care to. Be good practice. Okay, you're back. Let's see how this might work. Janet, we'll call her Janet, takes the position that I should let her treat me to frozen custard tonight, and she supports her position by pointing out that it's my birthday. So there I am, putting the claim of policy in the first substantial blank, and the claim of fact in support of it in the second. By the way, all this is just one big paragraph. I'm just splitting it up like this to build it. You wouldn't break it into separate paragraphs like this. And now I'm going to point out the warrant. Janet's reasoning is contradicted by its underlying assumption. Janet assumes that I don't have any plans tonight. The fact is, though, that my parents are treating me to a meal at Clyde's tonight. As proof, my mother has told me and the rest of the family not to make any other plans. So there's your body paragraph if you put all those pieces together. That's how you attack an underlying assumption in your refutation. The last thing we'll do is go over one of the body paragraphs in the sample paper's refutation. It starts with a transition, another objection I foresee. It transitions from the first objection that I dealt with in the previous paragraph, and then the topic sentence goes on. Would be one that Jefferson's colleague James Madison advanced in his famous Federalist 10. And now I'm going to introduce one of the other side's arguments fairly, I hope. Madison argued that small democracies are often controlled by factions, which can form an overbearing majority, advancing party interests or private interest over the public good. And, by the way, a faction is something like a political party. And then I'm going to, in my purple language, quote the source that goes against my position. And I'm making sure to integrate the quote into my own syntax. Madison defines democracy as his friend Jefferson would later define Ward, a society consisting of a small number of citizens who assemble and administer the government in person. And he claims that such a democracy can admit of no cure for the mischiefs of faction. So there's some bad news for me, apparently. Madison seems to be attacking my idea of a small number of citizens assembling to govern in person, and even seems to be anticipating and attacking his friend Jefferson's wards. And now I'm going to summarize the quote. Madison's essay is the bedrock of American federalism. By turning Montesquieu's objection to large republics on its head, Madison salvages that political philosopher's balance of powers theory for the new American Constitution he defends in Federalist 10. Not only have I summarized it, but I also point out the standard gloss that political theorists have given Madison's essay for decades. Now I'm going to admit what I can, and I'll come across hopefully as fair, and I'll also narrow the issues to what is important. Madison is right. Democracies can tyrannize minorities. So I'm not going to argue that. We don't have to waste any time since I'm ready to concede it. And I'm also hopefully looking reasonable. And now the most important part of the paragraph, I'm going to refute the argument that the other side advances. But our detractors' argument is misapplied. The argument that Federalist 10 is a strike against local civic involvement confuses a direct democracy, which Madison feared, with a citizen's direct and local participation in a republic, which Jefferson and I advocate. Madison in Federalist 10 addresses a situation in which a direct democracy supplants what we now understand to be local, state, and federal government. Jefferson and I, on the other hand, advocate direct democracy at only the most local level. Citizen ward members would elect representatives to regional, state, and national legislatures, just as citizens do today under the same Constitution that Madison advocates. Further, by raising the specter of a majority's tyranny over a minority at the local level, our detractors ignore certain protections built into that Constitution, along with that Constitution's amendments, the Bill of Rights, and the American court system, at both the federal and state level, often would protect an individual's rights against a local majority faction. So I have refuted the argument by showing one of the 5 ways one can do it, and here I'm using mostly C, irrelevant. I had one other paragraph for that particular argument advanced by the other side. I show that it's fallacious. They use an either-or argument, otherwise known as a false dilemma. That's it. Thank you for going through this rather long video on a very important topic, the argument paper's refutation.